Namaskar. Then let's start. Is 2:01 on my clock here to 2. I would like to welcome all once more to this series of courses which are being organized by a movement called Amandla Samaj Africa. What is Amandla? Amandla is a movement which is based on strength, wisdom, and collective working, building the community to resolve the problems. That is the masses being protagonists of the solutions of the issues that they face in the community. It is getting the support of Proud Brazil and Proud USA and many other members in Europe are also supporting. In Africa, a good number of people are supporting. So you are all most welcome. We'll have 28 classes. This today is the 5th by our dearest Professor Kathleen Pearson. She has experience of teaching for 40 years. That is not my part to say, but just I'll let to Guruvati to introduce her huge curriculum. And as far as I know, she's one of the best teachers of Neohumanist education. So we take advantage of her presence to ask questions, to go deep into the subject. Amandla Samaj Afrique is having many other projects. One is this course of Proud. There are courses on yoga meditation. Soon they'll start many sensibilization programs on YouTube. They have some projects, trying to start some projects in Ghana of supporting developmental activities in different places of Africa. So it is actually open to everyone. Whoever wants to cooperate, whoever wants to come in is most welcome. So I let now to Guruvati to present our professor. And personally, she's my teacher of Neohumanist education. So it is something very emotional on my end to have her here as a teacher for this course. I believe you will appreciate and get to know this great personality that is hidden in the hinterland of the USA. Namaskar.
Namaskar, everybody. We are pleased to welcome tonight Kathleen Pearson, who is a professor emerita of teaching, learning, and leadership at the School of Education at Long Island University, Brooklyn. She is the former director of teacher education at Goddard College and was the founding director of the John Dewey Project on Progressive Education at the University of Vermont, a research and policy organization. She has published numerous books and articles on democracy and education, arts in education, critical theory, curriculum theory, and spirituality and education. Her first academic paper on neo-humanist education was published in 1988, and she has continued to study and write on the topic since then. She is currently a global affiliate with the Gund Institute for Environment at the University of Vermont and is a contributing member of the Great Transition Initiative, a project of the Tellus Institute at Harvard University. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm not quite sure who knows what and what kind of expertise we have in the group. I'm assuming there's quite a bit. I will tell you, I'm not an expert on Africa. My area is neo-humanist education. So I apologize in advance if I am presenting some things you're already very familiar with, because I really wasn't quite sure what had gone before. I'm hoping we have some time at the end for some small group discussions and sort of an opportunity for some community building. I thought I would start really looking at neo-humanism itself. I'm not quite sure how familiar everyone is with this. This is a quote from Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, who really developed the idea of neo-humanism. The book was published in 1981, I believe, for the first time, The Liberation of Intellect. And I'll just read the quote by Sarkar here that sort of defines the scope of neo-humanism. He says that all molecules, atoms, electrons, protons, positrons, and neutrons are the veritable expressions of the same supreme consciousness. Those who remember this reality, who keep this realization ever alive in their hearts, are said to have attained perfection in life. They are the real devotees, the real bhaktas. When the underlying spirit of humanism is extended to everything, animate and inanimate, in this universe, I have designated this as neo-humanism. This neo-humanism will elevate humanism to universalism, the cult of love for all created beings of this universe. So there's a lot to unpack in this quote. I think the first thing to be aware of is this idea that there is a supreme consciousness, a creative force in the universe, called by many religions God, or by any number of words. But this idea that we all come from the same source really suggests that we are one to begin with, but we've forgotten that. And so, of course, this world is characterized by conflict.
Yes, Kathleen, if you can pause between sentences just for the translators. Okay.
Shall do.
Yes.
This connection with all of creation is really what many people call love or agape. And so really it's a very simple concept, even though it's very complex. Is the expansion of love for all creation. So neo-humanism extends some of the basic ideas of humanism. And I'll talk a bit about those later. First, the current context. How many of you, if you could sort of signal, have heard this term, the Anthropocene? Is it something that's familiar to people? I don't know. I don't see many pictures, so I'm not sure. I'll guess that some of you are familiar with it and some aren't. But I think the Anthropocene is the reason for the urgency of promoting neo-humanism. We are creatures of a 10,000-year period called the Holocene, a relatively stable climate and the flourishing of human civilizations. And we enjoy, at least many people on the planet enjoy, a fair amount of comfort, some economic stability, but others do not. Many scientists tell us that we're now entering a new era, and because of the human impacts on the planet, the extraction of minerals, the fossil fuel usage, excessive waste, pollution, that we're entering a new period of history, of geological history. And they've named this the Anthropocene, the period of human impact on the planet. Most scientists tell us that we're in a period of great acceleration. All these changes, the geothermal, the biocentric, the ecological, and the atmospheric, are bringing out changes in our system that threaten the very survival of life on the planet. Some scholars have more aptly termed this the capital Ocene. And this recognizes that it's not all humans who are responsible for the catastrophes that we face right now. It's rather the economic paradigm, the consumption patterns, and the values of a very small number, a small civilization that has brought about these problems. And the very visible consequences of this are flooding, tornadoes, fires, weather changes. And I have a very personal story here. I live in Vermont in the United States, which is a mountainous state. And it's always been promoted as a safe haven from climate change. A month ago, many of the towns in Vermont were absolutely destroyed, devastated by floods, which were not expected.
Can you please go a little bit slowly for the translators? Thank you.
So I repeat, just in my personal life, my two closest towns were completely devastated by floods. And I know we have another sister living in Maui, and I know Dada Maheshwaranand is on his way to Maui right now, where the historic town of Lahaina has been destroyed by fire. So I want to take just a minute, if you will use the chat, and just say one or two sentences if you or anyone you know has been affected recently by climate change or by environmental catastrophe. And let's just take a look at the chat and see how many people have something to post there. I wish I understood more languages. Is anyone posting? Hurricane, and where was the hurricane? Puerto Rico. We have another one forming off the coast of Mexico today, north and central Vietnam. Flood in the south of Brazil. My family is from Palma Canary Islands, and 2 years ago, they woke up and the island was in ashes. So I think we're beginning to realize there are no safe havens. Everyone on the planet will be affected in some way. Storms blowing down forests with torrential rains in South Africa. Heat waves in Geneva, Switzerland. All the grass is yellow. I didn't know a Canary Island was on fire right now. Much of the Canadian forest is burning right now. So it's clear that we are in a period of unprecedented catastrophe. Mass extinctions. This is, the UN reports over 1 million plant and animal species at danger. The microplastics in the ocean, I probably don't need to remind you of all this, but it's ubiquitous and it threatens the health of all species, not just the ocean species, but humans as well. So what does this have to do with decolonizing? The modern story is being written in stone as we speak. I'm sorry, this, I should just be showing the slideshow here. if there are humans around in another 100 years or so, they will be able to read about what happened in the layers of geology, the carbon particles. So really, I think the ultimate assumption here is that all of us who have been born in the 20th century and later are really responsible for what's happening, and we have to figure out what to do. So decolonizing. The point is, I think the global environmental crisis cannot be solved or separated from global justice. And this is really why we've linked decolonization and neo-humanism. It's very clear that the domination of human beings and the domination of nature are very much connected and inseparable. And it's also true that most of the damage inflicted by the environmental crisis is on people who live in countries that have been colonized before. So what does neo-humanism have to say about justice? You can read this, or I will actually read it also out loud. The endeavor to advance toward the ultimate reality by forming a society free of all inequalities, with everyone of the human race moving in unison, is called Samaj Tattva, the principle of social equality. This is a central idea of neo-humanism. We have to reject all hypocritical ideas that are contrary to this. And we need to welcome those ideas that help human beings to be established in it. So what happened under humanism? Humanism was a philosophy that really sort of in the Western world came about during the Enlightenment, the Renaissance. And under humanism, there was an effort to transcend the superstition of the medieval world. So the individual took on new importance and gained rights. However, in this process, some humans were considered inferior to others. I think we all know this, and not deserving of these rights. Women, people of color, children, people with disabilities, and non-Europeans were considered inferior. Certain cultural groups believed themselves morally, intellectually, culturally, and technologically superior. And there was this idea that they had a manifest destiny to conquer, dominate, colonize, enslave, and thus civilize these less than human others. Now, what happened was capitalism as an economic system evolved with colonialism. They are really inseparable. Of course, we've had the sale of goods and business and stuff before, but really the development of capitalism came with colonialism. And of course, the underpinnings of the Western economic superiority were the system of labor that exploited indentured servants and enslaved people. And this created the consolidation of wealth in individuals and in countries, and of course, the exploitation and oppression of the colonized. Again, I think this is not anything that any of you are unfamiliar with, it's just a reminder that colonization was violent. In the United States, for sure, it was genocidal as the colonizers tried to wipe out over 500 tribes that had developed very high levels of agriculture, civilization, and politics. Over 500 sovereign nations in the United States. Was characterized by the dispossession of land, the introduction of disease, the disruption of local economies, and the devastation of local customs, language, and culture. This last point becomes really important in neo-humanism, as Sarkar emphasized the valuing of local culture and language in our education, alongside the cultivation of this universal spirit. We can talk more about that. Colonization was often accomplished by missionary religious conversion and the imposition of dogma to control the mentality of the colonized. Sarkar has a lot to say about religious dogma, so it's also very much a part of neo-humanism. This idea that religion is often used to create superstition, to create inferiority complexes and false beliefs, and thus to control people. The other thing that happened at the same time to create this sense of inferiority and superiority was pseudoscience. And you may be familiar with some of the 19th century studies in craniology, the study of the head, comparative anatomy, phrenology, and eugenics. All were pseudoscience, scientific ideas that were propagated to justify racism and colonialism. So colonialism really dehumanizes the targets of colonization and justifies their brutal treatment. But it also harms the colonizers. And I can't remember, I know Sarkar says something about this, but I don't have a citation for it. But the colonizers end up, it results in their moral and cultural degradation. The form of education most prevalent across the planet today is really Western education. And I've written pretty extensively about this. If anyone's interested in that, you can contact me and I'll send you some things. But it's one of the most powerful colonizing forces in history. And it has really spread the ideology of humanism and Western culture across the planet. So many of the things that we take for granted as essential to education are actually very much part of this paradigm of colonizing education. This is why education is such an important thing to be thinking about it. So this is just a map of colonial Africa. Prior to colonialism, you know, I'm sure there's some experts on this Zoom meeting that know a lot more than I did, but this was what it looked like when it was colonized. Large ownership of the resources by France, by Britain, a little bit by Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Belgium. So huge territories controlled by Northern Europe. Are we doing okay in terms of speed?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So again, some of these terms may be familiar to a lot of you and others not. Some of the terms that are used by people who write about colonization, one of them is internal colonization. And this again connects with Sarkar's emphasis on understanding how inferiority complexes and superiority are propagated. So it's really quite a complex thing, you know. I mean, a country will use its media, its education, its churches. There's lots of ways that myths of inferiority and superiority are propagated by a dominant culture. And by a dominant culture, this simply means that the culture of the colonizers and privilege, of course, is an expression of that is used to identify people who benefit from being a part of the dominant culture. Transgenerational trauma is a kind of a new concept, although we've known about it for quite some time. But it's this idea that people whose recent ancestors, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, were victims of enslavement or genocide or displacement or oppression of any kind, generations down the road experience the effects of this. And some scholars are even saying that it becomes part of the genetic code. And I don't know that much about it, but it's the way that this trauma influences contemporary feelings of anxiety, of anger, of fear, a range of emotions that structure behavior. Racism is defined as, it's kind of a formula. It's not just discrimination, it's really discrimination plus power, based on an assumption that one race is superior to another. Ethnocentrism is the way in which we tend to evaluate another culture based on the assumptions of our own cultural background. So really part of neo-humanism and part of reflective, meditative, contemplative work is coming to understand our own biases and the way that all of us have been shaped by these cultural assumptions. White supremacy is pretty explanatory. It's a racist belief that white people are superior to people of other races and should be dominant over them. It can also refer to the kind of culture that's created, the white supremacy culture. Settlers, this is a complicated one, are basically people who moved into colonized territory. So I'm a settler in the United States because my great-grandfather and grandparents from Northern and Southern Europe came here after the genocide and displacement of the indigenous people. Indigenous meaning, it's a term that has many different terms. It could be Aboriginal, Native. It's basically people who originated in a particular place or were native to a location, or the living descendants of these people. Indigenization just means the growing awareness that we all need to come to understand and value the worldviews, the perspectives, and the knowledge of indigenous people. And I know that indigenous Native Americans, and I know this is true in Brazil to some extent, are often the caretakers of threatened environments. and active in social movements like opposing fossil fuel pipelines and things like that. So there's a great opportunity for modern Western white people to really expand their knowledge of the kind of wisdom that indigenous people can bring. Traditional ecological knowledge is more or less you know, we have a very narrow understanding of knowledge in Western education. It's sort of rational, scientific. It's got to be, you know, a certain kind of linear thinking and knowledge. Whereas traditional ecological knowledge relies on science, its own forms of science, but also ancestral knowledge and the wisdom that is passed down from generation to generation about the local place. Okay, let's see here. So, again, to reiterate, formerly colonized people may have internalized the messages of the colonizers, and this is called mental colonization. Oops. And education plays an important role in this process. And I think we know that we have a history in the United States. There was a history of taking children away from their families and away from their tribes and putting them in Western schools, often run by missionaries. And they were brutal. Finally, the information is coming to light about the suffering of the children who were in these schools. But the whole idea was to indoctrinate young people in the colonizers' culture and rid them of their own cultural backgrounds. And that was really mental colonization through education. Steve Biko is one of my heroes. He was a South African revolutionary. And one of his quotes is, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." And of course, Paulo Freire in Brazil has helped us to understand this even further. So post-colonialism, there are still colonies, don't get me wrong, but between 45 and 1975, most colonies gained their independence and became self-determinant. But what not everyone is aware of now is that colonialism has sort of changed its costume. It's taken on new forms. So the whole structure of economic imperialism, of mass incarceration, resource extraction, the debt structuring, the hundreds of foreign military bases that the US has all over the world, social media, pseudo-culture, foreign aid, and these externally imposed models of development and austerity and dependency are really the new form of colonialism. So it's post-colonial, but we haven't really decolonized yet. So what is decolonization? And I rely on this. I'm not a person who has suffered from colonization. I have relied for my learning on the stories and narratives of my many students from all over the world who have experienced colonization. I've read a lot, but really the experts of colonization are people who have experienced the victimization of it. But we're all responsible, I think, for unpacking it. So it's really a process of dismantling colonialist power in all of its forms. It's a very big task. And the reason why I think education is so important is because this includes the hidden or unconscious aspects that remain in our attitudes, our habits, our thinking, our culture, and our institutions that maintain colonial power and oppression over others. So I would say the work of anti-racism, the work of repatriation, all of these are aspects of decolonization. But just recognizing, I think, the way that the colonial mentality remains in our culture is key to it. So in neo-humanism, what's the actual process of decolonizing? Sarkar didn't talk very much about, he didn't talk about decolonizing. He did talk about the colonial experience in India and recognized that the colonial experience had been constructed by the creation of inferiority complexes. But in neo-humanism, there's this idea that through the process of meditation, social service, and education, we overcome the sentiments that limit our ability to love all creation, animate and inanimate. So there's a discussion that first of all, the child is born, it's got an ego, and its circle of sentiment is the family. And then geo-sentiment is territorial attachment. It's really the way that we identify with a place, a particular place, or a nation. Social sentiment is the way that we tend to be attached to a particular race or a particular religion or a social group or a social class. And going outwards, humanism. In humanism, we had this, sorry about that, an attachment to species. And that was very much a part of humanism, was that the human being is superior to all the rest of creation. And that gives us the ability to dominate and control and to master the rest of the planet. And of course, that's when it's connected with capitalism and endless growth and resource extraction, we could say that that's kind of what's taken us to the tipping point that we're at now, where all life on Earth is under threat. So the ultimate sort of sentiment in neo-humanism is this love and respect for all beings. Now I do want to say, because I think in some ways, for example, geosentiment, the attachment to land, is really a very important concept to many indigenous people. And in fact, the idea that the land itself is a source of wisdom, a source of ancestral stories. So I don't want to diminish the importance of land and place to people. And none of these phases are actually problematic in themselves. One's social identity, for example, can be a source of great empowerment. I think what Sarkar was telling us, that it's when we get stuck on this identity chain, when we start to feel that our race is superior to all the other ones, or that our religion is the only correct one, that the expansive flow of consciousness is blocked. So neo-humanism teaches us that we need to eliminate limiting labels and continue to expand our consciousness into this idea of interconnectedness and unity rather than separation and superiority. When we finally remove all these labels that we have affixed to ourselves, we find something that precedes all labels. And that's really the existential awareness that we really are all one, that we really are connected with everything in the universe. So that's the neo-humanist perspective that I think connects to the project of decolonizing our minds and overcoming limiting sentiments. So I actually thought we might take some time. Dada, you can tell me if this is all right, just in some small groups so people can have an opportunity to stop listening to me and talk to themselves for about maybe 15 minutes. Is that okay, Dada, to do some small group breakouts? Yes, okay. So I would say maybe in groups of 3, just random groups, take a little bit of time to examine and share a story of your own identity, whether it's around race or social class, gender, sexuality, ability. But tell this story in terms of the power relations, the hierarchies, and the histories of colonization and decolonization in your home country. Now, I realize this could take hours, and we only have, I would say, 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Aha, we have learned that he has allowed colonization so that we learn to struggle and achieve success. And then Guruvati says, I believe that decolonization needs to take place in both the colonizer and the colonized, because the superiority-inferiority complex is very much alive. So maybe one of you would like to expand on this a bit? Dada, Gyanananda, you want to unmute and start us off?
Because he's translating to French, so his mic is unmute, but you cannot hear him.
Cannot hear you, Dada.
I will stop the translation. Please make it 1 minute.
So Karunesh, my French is very, 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 very poor, but you're asking what factors favor decolonization? Dada Gyanananda, you are muted.
I can't update him the interpretation, so I can take him from his room now. He's stuck there.
Oh.
I will try.
Shiva Priya, take out of my room.
I'm trying, but I will end with all of them if I end with you.
But he's on our big screen.
Well, I will try to end and then I put the others again. Okay.
You should remove all of them.
Yes, I think so. I think we should come in the collective now and just share in the collective. It's much better for the moment. We can benefit more. Donc, j'étais en train de dire, on partage ici dans le collectif là. Si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez mettre dans le chat en français et je vais les traduire en anglais pour le professeur. Donc, Karunesh was asking, what are the factors to facilitate the process of decolonization? He confused a little bit colonization and decolonization. He asked in the past, but actually he wants to understand how to move ahead with decolonization.
Is anybody who is familiar with France have an answer for that?
S'il y a quelqu'un qui est familier avec le français, peut répondre cela. Guruvati ou Narada, vous pouvez répondre, ou même Ada qui parlait là il y a un peu de temps là.
Moi, si j'ai bien compris la question,
If
je
I understood
pense
well the
que,
question, I think
en fait, il y a bon espoir que les choses avancent là, parce que
nous avons
la
beaucoup
jeunesse,
de...
la jeunesse comprend aujourd'hui que il faut cette jeunesse aujourd'hui avec les nouvelles technologies, etc., sont au courant de tout ce qui se passe dans le monde et comprennent bien qu'ils ne veulent plus accepter d'être soumis. Et ils font la pression sur nos dirigeants aujourd'hui.
Excellent. Si tu peux parler ça aussi en anglais, là, pour la professeure de côté aussi.
Vas-y, vas-y. Ce serait mieux
donc,
que tu...
Okay, donc, what he said that from his point of view, the movement is on, that the youth is not anymore accepting the process of colonization. They are sharing a lot of informations, and certainly we have more scope for change. So, si tu veux parler alors très lentement là pour que je te traduise alors. Hein.
Ok, d'accord. Donc les dirigeants aujourd'hui, ils sont sous pression entre le colonisateur qui leur impose ce qu'ils souhaitent et la jeunesse qui dit non à la colonisation ou au néocolonialisme.
Donc he's saying that the leaders in Africa, for example, are under pressure from the youth who don't want any more decolonization, but themselves are obedient to the colonizer. So this dynamics is taking place now in many parts of the world.
Donc, on a vu le cas de la Libye où effectivement l'OTAN ou l'Occident a décidé de tuer Kadhafi par l'autorisation quelque part de l'OUA qui avait accepté à l'époque.
And we've seen that, for example, in the case of Libya, where the NATO took on itself to kill Gaddafi using a breach in the mandate that they got from the UN.
Donc, aujourd'hui, les Africains se sont rendus compte que pour le Niger, parce qu'on connaît les conséquences de ce qui s'est passé à la Libye, tous les djihadistes sont descendus en Afrique, le Mali, le Burkina, le Niger ont des problèmes à cause de cela.
And at this moment, most African youth and the Africans are not accepting the case of Niger, that there is an intervention, a military intervention in Niger, because from Libya, many jihadists came from Libya and to all the countries of the Sahel and created havoc and still are creating the havoc.
Donc, ce qui est important, c'est la jeunesse, c'est l'avenir. Donc, si la jeunesse comprend qu'elle doit prendre son avenir en main, moi, je ne m'inquiète plus.
So he's saying that what is important now is the youth. That if the youth understand very well what is going on now, and the proper education is imparted and strengthening, he will not be worried about the future. He feels that the future is positive.
Parce que les leaders seront obligés d'écouter la jeunesse, parce qu'un adulte, il est pris par son salaire, par autre chose, mais la jeunesse est insouciante et est prête à aller jusqu'au bout pour son idéal.
Comment est-ce que tu peux répéter une fois de
J'ai
plus
dit,
là?
par exemple, les adultes, ils ne peuvent pas se battre comme il faut parce qu'ils sont coincés, il leur faut le salaire pour pouvoir nourrir leur famille, etc. Alors que la jeunesse, elle est insouciante de ce côté-là, elle va se battre pour son idéal jusqu'au bout.
Donc, the old ones are not able to fight against this situation because they are mostly involved with maintenance of the families and different type of issues. But the youth is determined not to live in as inferior or as colonized. So it is the youth that is the key.
Right. I think what I'm hearing from a lot of people in the chat is the issue of reparations is probably one of the key issues of our time. And will probably prove to be one of the most difficult as well, as people get very protective of what they have and where they live.
Yes, it is. Here in South America, in Brazil, yesterday when I was on my bus from São Paulo to the interior of São Paulo, I just learned that in the Northeast, they killed one lady, they shot one lady, 12 bullets in her body, because she fights for the right of the Black people there. And her religion is different from the official religion. She's Afro-descendant, she is, so she was killed because of that. So, and her son was killed 2-3 months back.
Right.
And she was talking to somebody whose daughter was killed in that land. Now she's also killed. And all these descendants from the slavery now in Brazil, at least I can say, from the African side, they were not given any land. They were not given anything. Simply they were asked to get out of the farms. And that's how, so that reparation, yes, has to be thought about. And the respect of, they believe they cannot kill people like this just because of their religion. Like we are in the Middle East back, in the Middle Age.
Right. So Aradana, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, in the chat said, aren't we all supposed to learn English so we can communicate? And I know that Sarkar actually supported the idea of a lingua franca. I suppose right now it would probably be English. Somebody speculate in the future it may be Sanskrit. But it also speaks, I think, to the importance of including the study of multiple languages in neo-humanist schools. So people can, you know, really speak in many tongues. So it's complicated. We're trying to build a global movement and we don't all understand each other. So
yes,
that's very hard to do.
Elle dit qu'au même moment que nous voulons construire un mouvement universel et global, nous avons des difficultés de nous comprendre. Et elle mentionne donc que Sarkar aussi a appuyé l'idée d'une langue lingua franca, une langue universelle, pas une langue universelle, mais une langue de communication universelle, comme l'anglais. Mais elle ajoute le fait que dans nos éducations, nous pourrions penser à des multilangues, des éducations dans beaucoup de langues pour que nous puissions nous communiquer à côté de la langue locale, quoi.
I see a question here. Is the ideological struggle or the power struggle more significant in decolonization? Wow, what a great question. Are they separate? I guess would be my first question. Can you separate ideology and power?
Pouvons-nous séparer l'idéologie et le pouvoir? Ça, c'est la question qu'elle donne. Si c'est la lutte idéologique ou lutte de pouvoir, c'est ça la question qui est mise. Et donc, elle demande s'il y a moyen de séparer l'idéologie et le pouvoir.
I think there are some very big questions around strategy. You know, the dominant groups in the world control military, surveillance, police. And so there's a lot of conversation among non-dominant groups to what extent self-defense is important. And I think those are very difficult questions. You know, can there be a non-violent revolution, you know? And what are the tools of revolutionary activity if, you know, we're not talking about guns and bombs? How do you create a non-violent revolution? The youth are very idealistic.
I don't know if, yeah, I guess that can be heard. You know, around the world, it's manifested in places in Europe like Austria and also in the US with Trumpism and even in South American places, this idea of Trumpism is more general. It's about the right believing that through the courts, and it's even happening in Israel, through in the US through gerrymandering and whatnot, the acquisition of power can overcome ideological progress. And they have been successful. They have turned back what people perceived as certain ideological forward movement in the ideological debate by taking power back in different ways. And so I think there is a conscious movement on the part of the right-wing entities around the world that taking power will significantly delay this ideological transformation that we thought was happening. And so I do think this ignoring of power, sometimes in lieu of ideological progress, can lead to steps backward. We have to recognize that certain people are positioning themselves through different ways of overcoming democratic freedoms by taking power in very subtle ways. I think in the US that's just played out, and it's played out in other places. And so that's why I asked that question.
I think from what we listened from Kathleen, we can see that though they had the power, the military power, they had all the powers, but they made sure to occupy education, to use instrumentalized education to create a mindset of colonize and to facilitate even the process of neocolonization, along with that mindset, the religions also are used in that processes. So it seems that ideology has more strength over power, over military. So education, I believe, is the way. And somebody is asking me to translate in French. The discussion here is about which one is important, power or ideology.
French, not other.
Hello, Guruvati?
You are speaking English, you are not translating into English.
Yeah, I'm not accustomed to doing that, so I think... donc, la question ici en discussion est qu'est-ce qui est plus important, c'est l'idéologie ou le pouvoir? Et dans la présentation de Japa, et Kathleen aussi a posé cette question en fait, il démontre que ceux-là qui ont le pouvoir, que ceux-là qui ont l'idéologie, d'une certaine manière, ont tendance à aussi avoir le pouvoir. Donc, quand l'idéologie avance avec le contrôle du pouvoir, donc comme le contrôle de l'éducation, le contrôle des religions, donc cette idéologie a tendance à avoir une précédence sur le pouvoir, quoi. C'est ça, c'est que je peux résumer. Oui. Si Guruvati veut ajouter quelque chose là, quand je traduis, là, tu es la bienvenue. Hein?
Can I say something? Hello, I don't know now.
Yes, we can listen to you, Dada.
Okay.
Yes, we can listen to you.
Regarding this question that Kathleen mentioned about the violence, if a revolution can be violent, and I think, I don't know exactly where, but somewhere I think Sarkar mentioned in somewhere that this depends, the key is education, as I say. When most of the population have the percentage, the higher the percentage of the population have a consciousness and educated, the less blood will be in the transformation, in the revolution. When there is people are less educated, the transformation, there is a violent revolution. But it can be a possible cultural revolution with a minimal violence, when the most of the population have a higher consciousness. This is the against violence. But
Donc, ce qu'Amitabha dit là est que plus l'éducation est dans la grande partie de la population, moins de chances nous avons de violence dans un changement. Donc, un changement culturel basé sur l'éducation, oui, est possible, mais ça dépendra de l'étendue de gens éduqués dans cette communauté.
That looks like there's another question here from Brazil. What do we, and we might end on this because I think that's a very good point about the importance of education and spirituality. What is the biggest challenge of a neo-humanist and liberating education in neo-colonized countries? Anybody like to address that question? Japa says, people in power colonize by controlling education.
Yes. In fact, now itself, we can see education, which is just a material education, eliminate the psychic and spiritual aspect of education from the curriculum.
Yeah, I think another element of this is not only the control of education, but the breakdown in community. One of P.R. Sarkar's, one of the things that we know that is part of this work is to create these communities. And I think the only way to take back the education is through the education being seated in communities. Once you can create new communities, and within those communities, you can educate. But one of the things that the powers to be do is break down community also, and in breaking down community, then become those who provide education. So the reclaiming of community of different times, the intersectional communities, which you mentioned earlier, I think is the only way that we'll be able to achieve this education, this mission of education. Otherwise, the powers to be are in control of the education.
Right.
And so therefore you aren't going to be successful, I believe.
And Amar has a very good point in the chat. Germany was the most highly educated country, probably in Western education. And look what happened there. So I think you're right, Amar. I wouldn't say spiritual and educational are binaries, but we need to have a spiritually based education. So I want to encourage all of you to get more familiar with our neo-humanist education program. Donna's certainly familiar with our program. I think that's what we're trying to accomplish, is to really create a very unique form of education that is grounded in spirituality, but that's also critical pedagogy and decolonizing at the same time. So hopefully we'll have a book out in the next couple of months. Invite you all to read it and get involved with your local neo-humanist education group. So I think we can probably close now. We're at an hour and a half.
I want to translate what you just said a while ago. So what Catherine is telling is that Amar put
You're in English.
Yes, I am. I had to change the tune. Donc, ce Catherine a dit est que Amar a mis dans le texte, on disait là que l'éducation est très importante pour une révolution pacifique. Et en même temps, on disait aussi que autant l'éducation est étendue, beaucoup plus de chances nous aurons une révolution beaucoup plus harmonieuse. Mais alors, Amar vient, il a intervenu, il dit, mais en Europe, là, nous avons l'Allemagne qui avait une très bonne éducation, c'était l'un des pays les mieux éduqués en Europe. Mais en même temps, nous voyons ce qui est là aujourd'hui. Et donc, il dit que nous devons avoir une éducation spirituelle. Alors, Kathleen entre dans le dialogue. Il dit que nous ne devons pas faire une contradiction entre la spiritualité et l'éducation. Qu'au contraire, nous devons parler d'une éducation basée sur la spiritualité, une éducation néohumaniste. Et donc, il dit que vous encourage à rentrer en contact avec le système d'éducation néohumaniste que nous avons aujourd'hui. Nous avons un collège à Asheville qui donne des cours d'éducation néohumaniste, où Kathleen, en fait, est la directrice académique, et qui bientôt, peut-être dans 3-4 mois, nous aurons un livre sur l'éducation néohumaniste qui, en même temps, basé sur la spiritualité, mais aussi parle de la décolonisation, aussi parle de pensée critique. Donc, en fait, quand on va développer les deux côtés dans la vision même néohumaniste. Yes, I finished.
So we're at an end, right?
Thank you very much. It's been very, very informative.
Thank you all.
Namaskar.
Stay in touch.
Namaskar, namaskar, namaskar.
Yes,
Thank you.
can they send us the links to get in touch with you?
They want to
Email?
have the contact of the school of.
What is the name of the book that's coming out?
The name at this point is Neohumanist Education, Theory and Practice for the Anthropocene.
Éducation néohumaniste, la théorie et la pratique pour l'ère anthropocène. Ça, c'est le titre du livre que Kathleen est en train d'écrire, en fait.
I think Dada's the only person here who's read most of it.
Thank you. But still, I need to read more to grasp it and make good use of it. I can say that Neohumanist education, as we are accustomed to see it in our schools, has got a big leap at this moment with this College of Asheville, where it's brought to a level very, very high. And I would encourage everyone who is interested in changing the world really to get a grasp of it. In fact, there is a course that will be started soon. So you all are invited to join that course. It is really worth. So je voudrais dire donc l'éducation néohumaniste que nous connaissons jusque-là a pris un saut galopant avec l'introduction du collège néohumaniste d'Asheville, et qu'il y a en fait, ils vont commencer des classes une fois de plus de 2 ans, et ces cours-là vont commencer dans peu de temps, dans 2 semaines ou 3 semaines, je ne sais pas. Et si vous vous intéressez, c'est une très bonne opportunité. C'est là qui pensent à travailler pour la libération de l'humanité. C'est une très grande opportunité de prendre ce cours-là.
Except it is in English.
I want to ask something. Are you aware, Beyond Materialism, Spirituality for the 21st Century? Do you know that book by Amal Jacobson? Did you hear me, somebody?
Yes.
Do you want to write the title in the chat?
I don't know what's going on with my title, my chat. It's Beyond Materialism.
Right.
Spirituality for the 21st Century by Amal Jacobson.
Right. It's a new book out.
Yeah.
Beyond Materialism. Good. I look forward to reading that.
She said it's written by Amal. Amal is Arun. Amal is Arun?
Arun's son.
Okay, Arun's son. Okay.
All right.
Thanks
everyone.
a lot. Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to have you. And this Samaj Amandla is very grateful for you having taken time to come to share your few minutes. And we hope that you'll continue. You'll continue.
Maybe I'll pop in on some of your classes. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.